हाय गाइस, वेलकम टू अवर यूट्यूब चैनल एमबीए पाठशाला। तो एमबीए पाठशाला ने आप लोगों की स्पीड बूस्ट करने के लिए, आपकी टेस्ट टेकिंग एबिलिटी को इंप्रूव करने के लिए एक फ्री डेली क्विज का इनिशिएटिव लिया है, जिसको आप लोग हमारे पोर्टल पर www.mbapathshala.com पर जाकर हमारा जो फ्री कोर्सेज का सेक्शन है, कैट 2026 फ्री प्रिपरेशन एक कोर्स है, उसमें एनरोल करके आप डेली बेसिस पर एक फ्री क्विज लगा सकते हो। ये क्विजेज आप लोगों के एग्जाम यानी कि कैट 2026 तक हम लोग प्रोवाइड कराने वाले हैं। हमारे यूट्यूब चैनल पर इसका एनालिसिस मिलेगा, क्विज रहेगी हमारे पोर्टल पर।
Hi students, in today's daily dose, what are we going to do? We are going to attempt a few parajumble questions. So now let's look at these parajumble questions. Let's get started from the very first question. Okay, read the sentences carefully, take a brief pause. Students, we are talking about central banks. Okay, we are talking about consumer spending. We are also discussing prolonged economic expansion. Okay, and there is a deliberate cooling of the economy that we are discussing. So now let's try to look for the pairs. Let's try to connect them. Try to do it by yourself, because now we are at that stage where you should be able to connect them on your own team. So let me reveal the order now. The order is 3, 1, 2, 4. So how is it that the sentences get connected? Prolonged economic expansion eventually generates overheating, driving up the cost of raw materials and labor. So the cost of raw materials and labor is going up. Team, can you see that? That means there is inflation. The cost of raw materials and labor is going up. Central banks typically respond to accelerating inflation. Something is going up, something is moving up, and what is that? The cost is going up. That means inflation is there. Inflation is accelerating. Central banks typically respond to accelerating inflation by aggressively raising benchmark interest rates. So because of inflation, see, it's a very simple cause and effect relationship, students. Because there is inflation, that is why the central banks take this sort of action, resort to this sort of action. And what is this sort of action? It is, of course, raising benchmark interest rates. Consumer spending slows dramatically as borrowing costs for mortgages and business loans becomes prohibitively expensive. Because now let's connect 1 and 2. I guess you have understood the relationship between 3 and 1. Rising cost of raw materials referred to this inflation, and to tackle this inflation, benchmark interest rates are raised. The moment the benchmark interest rates are raised, students, what happens? Look at it. Borrowing cost. The borrowing cost for mortgages, that means loans. If you're wondering what mortgages are, we are talking about loans. Because the interest rates are raised, because the interest rates go up, because of that, the borrowing cost becomes much higher. The borrowing cost for loans becomes much higher. So once again, there is a cause and effect relationship between 1 and 2. The moment the interest rates go up, borrowing costs for mortgages and loans and business loans become prohibitively expensive. Now what happens? A deliberate cooling off. A deliberate cooling off the economy helps stabilize prices but elevates the risk of a minor recession. Students, this particular aspect, that there is a risk of a minor recession, that there is a risk of a minor recession, it can't be written anywhere else. So we have a cause and effect sort of chain, a sort of cause and effect relationship chain in 3, 1 and 2, followed by 4, which is more like a solution to the problem. So a deliberate cooling of the economy. If you allow the economy to deliberately cool, then what happens? The prices stabilize, inflation comes down, prices stabilize, but it leads to something else as well. It leads to the risk of a minor recession. So this particular aspect, students, the elevated risk of a minor recession, it could not have been written anywhere else except at the end. That is why 4 has to be the concluding statement. If you write 4 anywhere between 3, 1 and 2, it completely disrupts it completely disrupts the cause and effect change that was there, the cause and effect chain that was there in 3, 1 and 2. Now I'm moving to the next question. I hope you've understood this. Let's look at the next one. Once again, team, take a brief pause. Take a brief pause. Try to connect them on your own. Try to look for the mandatory pairs. Take a pause. Look at all of them. The clues are there. Now I'm telling you the answer. The answer is 1, 3, 4, 2. Students, 1 is the opening statement, 2 is the closing statement. Now let's see. Linear chronologies dominated early fiction. Linear chronologies, that means you are moving in a straight line. You are moving in a straight line in a chronological order. One thing leads to another, then the next thing leads to the thing after that. So linear chronologies dominated early fiction. Earlier there was a linear format, a straight line format, a straight line chronological format in early fiction, reinforcing the idea of a predictable. So it reinforced, it strengthened the idea. Which idea? Of a predictable cause and effect universe. Okay. Authors initiated experimenting with multi-perspective frameworks and unreliable narrators to mirror psychological realism. The biggest clue out here, team, is initiated experimenting. In the first statement, we are referring to a trend that was seen in early fiction. This trend dominated early fiction. It was a staple, yes, it was a staple scenario. It was the staple scenario of the early fiction. Now something changed because they started experimenting. Authors started experimenting now. Can you see the sort of link that is there between 1 and 3? 1 presents a sort of scenario, an age-old sort of traditional conventional scenario, and 3 then says, okay, now the authors began experimenting with multi-perspective frameworks and unreliable narrators to mirror psychological realism. So they wanted to show, they wanted to illustrate what kind of realism? Psychological realism. So they started experimenting with different formats. And what were the different formats? The multi-perspective framework and unreliable narrators. Okay. Accordingly was the clue, team. Accordingly was the clue that this is the consequence. Of something. Accordingly, consequently means that this is the consequence. It very simply means as a result. So now you have to figure out what's written over here. Accordingly, readers had to assume a more collaborative role. So as a consequence, thus, therefore, something similar would be thus, therefore, hence. So readers had to assume a more collaborative role. Why did the readers have to assume a more collaborative role? Look at it. Stream of consciousness techniques further, that's another clue, further dissolved structural boundaries. This is where, team, 3 and 4 are a pair. How are 3 and 4 a pair? This is where a trend started. Look at this word, initiated. Look at the word initiated. This is where a trend started. And now stream of consciousness techniques further. Now we are going a step further. From the start, from the initiation that is there in 3. Students, from the start, from the initiation that is there in 3, we are looking at further dissolving of structural boundaries. The boundaries had started dissolving. The narrators had become unreliable. Sure, back in 3 itself, the word further takes it a step ahead. That is why 3 and 4 become a pair, because the start was mentioned in 3. The initiated word clearly told us that this was the start, and further takes it a step ahead. That makes 3 and 4 a pair. That makes 3 and 4 a pair. Okay, let's read it. Stream of consciousness techniques further dissolve the structural boundaries, abandoning traditional beginning, middle, and end formats. So the traditional beginning, middle, and end formats where everything moves in a sort of systematic chronological order, that sort of structure was completely broken. Now it was completely abandoned. Because it was completely abandoned, there was nothing like a traditional beginning, there was nothing like a traditional middle or end. Accordingly, thus, therefore, the reader had to step up. The reader had to step up and assume a more collaborative role. Why did the reader have to assume a more collaborative role? Because now the writer was not presenting a clear-cut beginning, middle, and end. It wasn't chronological. It wasn't that straightforward as it used to be earlier. Because of this straightforward format being abandoned, because of this straightforward format being completely given up, so the readers had to step up and assume a more collaborative role, actively piecing together the fragmented plot. Look at it. The plot is fragmented. There is no sense of beginning, middle, or end. The plot is completely fragmented. The pieces are lying here and there. The pieces are lying here and there. So the reader has to tie the threads together, has to piece the beginning, middle, and end together because everything was completely fragmented. So students, 4 and 2 are a beautiful pair, are a beautiful mandatory pair accordingly. Thus, therefore, because the beginning, middle, and end was completely abandoned. Sure? So 4 and 2 are a pair. So 1, 3, 4, 2. Let me now show you the next question. Students, take a brief pause. This is on the lengthier side. This is on the lengthier side and it seems to be somewhat dense. The language seems somewhat dense. Take a pause. Try to connect the pairs. Try to look for each and every possibility. Now, the answer is 2, 1, 4, 3. Students, the answer is 2, 1, 4, 3. Let's see how they get connected. Enlightened era theories of sovereignty. Sovereignty means freedom, self-rule, self-governance. Enlightenment era theories of sovereignty frequently assumed a rational citizenry capable of subordinating immediate passions to abstract civic obligations. So those Enlightenment era theories of sovereignty, freedom, what did they assume? That the citizens are rational, and they will be willing to, they are capable of understanding that their immediate passions are secondary, they are subordinate, they should be relegated to something higher. And what is higher? Abstract civic obligations. So the Enlightenment era theories assumed that citizens are rational enough, intelligent enough to understand that they will have to give more priority, more importance to abstract civic obligations than to their immediate pressing concerns. So they have this understanding, they have this capability. That was the assumption of Enlightenment era theories. Let's move further. 20th century political catastrophes weakened confidence in that assumption. Which assumption? Students, that assumption. Which assumption? The assumption mentioned in 2. So 2 and 1 are a clear pair. 2 and 1 are a clear pair. The moment you read something like that assumption, you have to ask yourself, which assumption? So this was pretty much a straightforward pair. Although the language is somewhat dense, but the clue was really very powerful. The clue was really very clear. Weakened confidence in that assumption. Which assumption? That citizenry is rational and they will be able to see the value, the significance of abstract civic obligations. So by 20th century, what had happened? Political catastrophes. Catastrophe is a disaster. Students, catastrophe means a disaster. Weakened confidence in that assumption, demonstrating the susceptibility. Susceptibility when you are vulnerable, when you are prone to something, when you can get hurt, when your position is not very strong, you are sort of prone, vulnerable. So it demonstrated that the mass electorate, that susceptibility of mass electorates to orchestrated emotional mobilization. That means they can fall prey to, electorates can fall prey to orchestrated emotional mobilization. Orchestrated, something that is set up, something that is sort of created, artificially set up and managed. Okay, so people, the citizens, the ones who are to vote, electorates, they may fall prey to, they may be susceptible to emotional mobilization. Of course, 20th century political catastrophes showed that it demonstrated that. So, STEAM, that assumption clearly told us that two and one are a pair. Now let's read further. Contemporary democratic institutions, therefore is the clue out here. Thus, therefore, hence. Thus, therefore, hence. Contemporary. Now, look at the timeline, students. Enlightenment era. Enlightenment era. Look at the chronological order. Look at the timeline. From Enlightenment era, we move to the 20th century. Can you see that? There is a typical chronological order. There is a sequence of events. There is a timeline. Contemporary, that means modern, today. So we are tracking this timeline. We started from Enlightenment era theories, then we reached 20th century. 20th century in the first sentence. 4 takes it a step further in the chronological order. Now we are saying what happens right now. Contemporary democratic institutions, therefore, confront a recurring tension. Therefore, confront a recurring tension between procedural openness and the psychological vulnerabilities inherent in collective decision making. So, what sort of psychological vulnerabilities are we discussing, students? Use your gray cells. What sort of psychological vulnerabilities? That the mass electorates, they are susceptible to, they are vulnerable to. Look at the connected words: susceptibility and vulnerability. Susceptibility and vulnerability are pretty much the same. So, team, the susceptibility in 1 becomes the vulnerability in 4. Yes or no? Emotional mobilization. They get emotional, and then what happens? Anyone can take advantage. They are susceptible. They are prone to such sort of psychological manipulation. Yes or no? Emotional, orchestrated emotional mobilization. That means they can be affected. They can be manipulated. They are psychologically vulnerable. Yes or no? Therefore was the clue. Contemporary democratic institutions therefore confront a recurrent tension. They have to face this recurrent tension. What kind of recurrent tension? They need to be procedurally open, and at the same time, there are vulnerabilities which are inherent in collective decision making. Sure. Debates concerning algorithmically curated information environments intensify this dilemma. Which dilemma? Students, this dilemma. Which dilemma? Which confronts them? Which confronts them? This one, which is there in 4. Which dilemma? The dilemma between what they should do. Dilemma between 2 things: procedural openness and psychological vulnerabilities. This dilemma. Should we be procedurally more open, and at the same time we realize that psychologically our electorate, our voters are vulnerable in collective decision making. They may be emotionally swayed. So debates concerning algorithmically curated information environments intensify this dilemma because persuasive influence increasingly operates through invisible mechanisms resistant to public scrutiny, resistant to public examination. Team, very clearly, we can see that 3 has to be the closing statement. 3 has to be the closing statement. 2, 1, and 4. They presented a wonderful timeline right from Enlightenment era theories to 20th century, and from 20th century to contemporary democratic institutions. So this timeline cannot be broken, cannot be ruptured. 3 has to come at the end because 3 presents the implications of this entire scenario. What are the implications? That given this scenario, debates have got intensified. Debates have got intensified. Debates concerning what? Algorithmically curated information. So it's a different thought. It takes it a step further. It cannot be placed anywhere between 2, 1, and 4. So this is going to be the closing statement, and it gets connected with 4 equally well. It gets connected with 4 very well, students. This dilemma, which dilemma? The dilemma that confronts them, being the choice that they have. Should they be more procedurally open when they realize that psychological vulnerabilities are there in collective decision making? So every time you come across a pronoun, question it. You should have asked this question, this dilemma, which dilemma? So students, the answer is 2143. Let's move ahead. Now question number 4. Take a brief pause. Once again, the language seems to be somewhat dense, and that's the whole point, that at this stage you have to start attempting questions that are somewhat challenging. So in today's session, I'm discussing with you those sort of challenging questions where there are no obvious connections, where the obvious connections seem to be missing. Deeper interpretational reading is required. So take a brief pause, read it. Now I'm telling you the answer, students. It has to be 4, 3, 1, 2. Now let's see. Classical market models. Classical market models assume agents process vast informational streams with perfect mathematical neutrality. Classical market models, they believe, they have this assumption that agents, what do? They process whatever information that's available to them, the vast information that's available to them with complete mathematical neutrality. And they always try to maximize, they always try to optimize, maximize their expected utility. Utility refers to satisfaction. So, team, classical models assume that agents are such that they wish to maximize their satisfaction, they wish to have greater utility, greater satisfaction, and to do so, they adopt a perfectly mathematically neutral model while processing vast informational streams. So these models assume that there is no bias in their mind. They are absolutely neutral when it comes to examining information, scrutinizing information. And why are they absolutely neutral? Because these models assume that they wish to maximize their satisfaction, and to maximize their satisfaction, they are completely neutral in their approach. Whatever benefits them, whatever gives them greater utility, they of course favor that. That is the assumption, students. That is the assumption on which classical market models are based. Empirical evaluations of risk assessment reveal. What do they reveal? This is the classical market model which assumed something. However, empirical, what you see observationally, what you have observed, observation. Students, the moment you come across something like empirical, you are referring to what happens in the real world, what is observed, or the sort of experiments that are carried out. So it refers to what? The data that has been collected, the observations, what do they show? Empirical evaluations of risk assessment reveal a persistent reliance on cognitive shortcuts that systematically over-index immediate emotional salience. In dense language, what's written is very simple. Behind these dense words, the idea is empirical evaluations reveal, they show, empirical evaluations have shown that there is an emotional component also. They are not completely mathematically neutral. They rely on what? Cognitive mental shortcuts. They rely on cognitive mental shortcuts, and those mental shortcuts systematically over-index. They give greater priority to. They give greater, what should I say, priority to emotional salience. The emotional component becomes very, very significant in their decision making. Does that make sense? So, 3 completely counters. Students, 4 and 3 are a pair. Why are they a pair? Because 3 presents a contrast. Team, if you understand that, 3 presents a contrast to what 4 stated. These market models assumed something, but in the real world, when you evaluate the data that you have, the observational evaluations of risk assessment, they reveal a different story altogether. They show a different story altogether. They show that emotional angle, emotional component is also very, very significant. Sure? So 3 presents a contrast to what was written in 4. Discrepancies between theoretical equilibrium and observed asset allocation. Now listen to me very carefully. Why 1 should come right after 3. Team, 4 talked about the theoretical aspect. Yes or no? 4 talked about the classical model which assumed something. This was theoretical. Yes or no? This was the theory. This was absolutely theoretical and empirical. As I said, what is observed? Theoretical equilibrium and observed asset allocation. So there is a discrepancy between them. So if you look at 3, it talks about what? The observed evaluation, the empirical evaluation of risk assessment. So right after 4 and 3, because 4, as I said, talks about the theoretical model, 3 talks about the observational realities, and then there is a gap between the two. There is a much pronounced gap between the two. Discrepancies exist between the two models, between the two formats. So discrepancies between theoretical equilibrium and observed asset allocation frequently mimic, show, mirror. That means exact replica of something, the mirror of something, the image of something, frequently mirror the psychological weights attributed to catastrophic, low probability events. So, frequently mirror the psychological weights. Psychological weights, that means the significance, psychological significance attributed to, that is attached to, which ones? Catastrophic, low probability events. So, team, 1 has to come right after 4 and 3 because it sort of presents them, it combines them together, and elaborates both of them. That discrepancies which exist between these two formats, they mirror the psychological weights that are attached to the catastrophic. You already know what catastrophe is. Disastrous, catastrophic, disastrous, low probability, that means low chance events. Architecture designed to mitigate systematic mispricing, designed to mitigate. Team, till now we were discussing the problems, the issues that exist, that the theoretical model suggests something. It suggests that people are absolutely rational. They are sort of completely rational in the sense they analyze everything with neutrality, with mathematical neutrality. Then 3 said, no, it's not that. they are pretty emotional. They give importance to emotional salience. Then comes one. It says discrepancies exist. In fact, discrepancies mirror the psychological weights. We have already discussed that. Two, students, look at it carefully. Why should two be at the end? Read it. Architecture designed to mitigate systematic mispricing. So now you are trying to figure out a solution designed to mitigate, mitigate, reduce mispricing. So when you are trying to reduce mispricing, you are trying to come up with a solution. The architecture which is designed to be the solution, so that no mispricing happens, must incorporate frameworks that account for bounded rationality. That means rationality which was reflected in 4 without restricting individual autonomy. So individual autonomy should also be there. If the individual feels like making a certain decision, that individual should be able to make that decision freely as well. So 2 students can't be placed anywhere else, because 4, 3 and 1 together spell out a situation, spell out a sort of messy, problematic situation where discrepancies are there between what a theoretical model of investment was and how observed asset allocation differs from it. 2 talks about coming up with a solution and presents a few sort of suggestions that architecture should be such that it must. If you think the suggestions aren't there, students, read the word must. So it presents a suggestion as to how the solution should be designed. So the solution will come at the end, towards the end. That is why it has to be 4, 3, 1, 2. Now we are moving to the final question, and that is once again something a little challenging. Take a brief pause. If you are smart enough, you will be able to find the connections. Shall I tell you the answer now, team? The answer is 2, 4, 1, 3. Now let's see. Early democratic constitutions lacked an explicit. Explicit is open, clear. Explicit, something that is spelled out clearly out there in the open. So early democratic institutions, they did not have an explicit mechanism. So no explicit clear mechanism was there to invalidate laws that violated fundamental rights. So early democratic constitutions, they did not have a clear method through which those laws that went against the fundamental rights of the people, those laws could be invalidated, those laws could be annulled. There was no such, students, there was no such format to annul, to sort of invalidate, those laws which contravened the fundamental rights. Okay. Executive overreach went shows past tense. Students, it shows past tense. So we are still continuing in that past where early democratic constitutions did not have such a clear mechanism to annul, invalidate such laws. Executive overreach went largely unchecked. Why did executive overreach go largely unchecked? Because this mechanism was not there. Team, connect the two. There is a cause and effect. There is a clear cause and effect between 2 and 4. 4 presents a sort of effect, the consequence. Because an explicit mechanism was not there, because a clear mechanism was not there. So executive overreach, it went on without any check, without any restraint, creating frequent power imbalances between government branches, because there was no clarity, Sure, such laws could not be invalidated, could not be annulled. So what happened? Executive overreach. It kept on. It kept on exacerbating. It went largely unchecked. Sure. And because of that, power imbalances were created between different branches of government. A landmark judicial decision established the principle. Then came, students, then came a landmark judicial decision. It's more like a story, it's more like a sequence of events, one after the other. Then what happened? A landmark decision was made. A landmark judicial decision was there which established the principle. It established a rule, a principle that courts possess the inherent authority to review legislative acts. So, when a landmark judicial decision established the principle that courts had the authority, the power to review legislative acts. If you talk about legislative, that means you are referring to the law-making body. So what it says is that a judicial decision finally presented a principle that the courts, that the judiciary has the authority to review, to examine, to check whatever laws the legislative passes. Are you with me? Legislators now. So 3 has to be, students, 3 has to be at the end because it shifts the past into present. Do you see a timeline? Even in this sentence number 1, established was clearly simple past. Can you see that? Everything, all the other sentences starting from 2 to 4 to 1, they were in the past tense. Then we talk about what? Legislators now draft statutes with greater precision. Why do they draft, their statutes with greater precision? Because they know their statutes can be reviewed by judiciary. Judiciary has got the authority to review their statutes. That is why legislators now, in today's time, legislators today, they draft their statutes with greater precision so that they don't have to mess with judiciary, so that they can avoid potential constitutional challenges from opposition groups. Are you with me, students? So 3 clearly shows, in fact, the word now was a wonderful indicator that it talks about the present scenario. It talks about the present contemporary scenario. And let me, quickly make you revise how these sentences were placed. Early democratic institutions, they lacked a clear mechanism. Because they lacked an explicit mechanism, that is why executive overreach went unchecked. Executive overreach, that means they were sort of abusing and misusing their authority. Who? The executive branch. The executive branch was abusing and misusing its authority. That happened because the mechanism wasn't there. So then what happened? A judicial decision was established. A judicial decision established the principle. So with this principle being there, legislators now are aware that such a principle exists, and therefore they draft all their statutes with greater precision. Otherwise, their decisions can be challenged, their statutes can be challenged by opposition groups. And students, therefore, 3 has to come at the end. It moves from past to present. So with that, we come to the end of our discussion. Students, these are undoubtedly quality questions, the kind of questions which are challenging and which will take you in the right direction. So with that, I'll take your leave. Thank you so much.